Hello from Brussels, I'm Mark Watson. Join us at 7 p.m. CET tonight for our live broadcast of the US presidential election show. We'll be joined by experts from across Europe and the US, and we'll be giving you our final forecast. We'll go through the night, so join us again at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning with the latest state of play. We'll go through the night, so you don't have to. We'll be looking at what it all means for the US, for Europe, and for the world too. In the meantime, take care. Hello, Ryan. Good evening.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Very well. Good to see you.
Likewise. Likewise. Big day.
Indeed.
I think we're live.
Can you see us on the screen?
I can't see you. I can see myself in the bottom corner, but I can't see you.
Mm-hmm. Are you checking this on YouTube?
Yeah, on YouTube, no one can see any of us.
Okay.
Maybe if your camera's turned off, Mark, that might be.
Yeah, I just checked that. Cameras. It's like the switch to throw us onto the screen that I can't seem to find that I found yesterday. Backgrounds.
The perils of doing a live show.
Yeah. did we do it yesterday? I'm going to end the broadcast. Do I want to do that? Not yet. Having issues. Maybe if I'm just going to come out completely, should we just come out and come back in?
Sure.
Okay. I think we got, can you hear me now, Ryan?
I can.
I think we got 3 disappointed viewers, probably 2 of them are us, so I think we got, can you hear me now, Ryan? I can. We see if 3 disappointed viewers, probably 2 of them are us, so I can actually hear that through YouTube, so apologies for those of you who are watching or trying to watch the show. We're having a few technical problems here in Brussels. We'll try and resolve them as soon as we can. I can actually hear that through YouTube, so apologies for those of you who are watching or trying to watch the show. We're having a few technical problems here in Brussels. We'll try and resolve them as soon as we can.
Battery 70%.
Mark, I think we should close the YouTube stream.
Yeah. It works so well yesterday. Exit cellular layout. So at least we're doing this now, not 7 in the morning. I mean, it's incredibly simple screen I've got in front of me, and there's like no, it just says we should already be launched into the YouTube video.
Aha, there we go.
Well, hello everyone, and we are now live, and we apologize for the technical glitches that we encountered a little earlier, but welcome for those of you who are watching to the US presidential election show. It's great to see you tuning in again, and this is the live version after running this show for about 2 months now, in particular with my colleague from LP Brussels, the in-house US politics expert at LP Brussels. Welcome back to you, Ryan Hunter.
Thank you. Hi.
And we're going to run this show now from 7 till 8 p.m. CET, but in particular, we're going to run another live show at 7 o'clock in the morning CET through to 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. And tell us, Ryan, why you think we picked that time. Why is that time so important for those of us who want to discover the results of the election at the earliest possible opportunity, so we can analyze what it means for Europe, the US, of course, and indeed the world? Why is 7 a.m. in your view tomorrow morning so important?
It's a good question, Mark. Well, 7 a.m. is most likely when all the polls will have closed, and we may even have a declared winner. But 7 a.m. just gives time for us to see what the candidates do, and whether one concedes or one declares victory. I think we should know that by 7 a.m. Also to save us a couple hours of more sleep as well. But really, I think by 7 a.m. we should have some clear idea of the conclusions from tonight's election, whether that be a winner or the conclusion that there is no winner, and we'll be waiting for some of the states to finish counting.
Okay, so we're going to be joined at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning by yourself, Ryan, and I think at that point you think you're fairly confident you'll be able to give us a fairly definitive answer as to who's ahead, at least at that stage, notwithstanding any legal uncertainties, of course, that we might encounter. But we're also going to be joined by our colleagues from across the Brussels Group network. We'll be hearing from Berlin, Paris, Lisbon, and our Luther Pendragon colleagues in London too. The whole world is watching tonight. What do you think so far we can expect, Ryan? You promised you would give us your last, final, and indeed most accurate prediction on the show tonight, live on air, as you are. What is your feeling tonight? Who's going to win, and by how much?
Well, this race has been remarkably consistent and remarkably unremarkable in its movement in the polls. We're almost right back to where we started before the COVID crisis in terms of Joe Biden's 8-point lead in the polls. And, it really hasn't moved. We've had some major events, many of them quite recently, and there's been maybe a 1-point movement here and there, but every time there's a bounce, the race bounces back. And so it's been tough to look beyond Joe Biden winning the election for quite some time. Now, having said that, no matter what the lead is nationally, we've already covered on this show why the national lead can be quite deceiving, because it doesn't really matter for Joe Biden if he's racking up votes in California, in New York, even in Virginia, and in states that he's sure to win. It's much more important are a very narrow selection of battleground states, and in those states, the race remains still quite close.
Okay, and to push you a bit further, so last time we were able to share was roughly what? I mentioned a number then, Ryan.
I think last week I said 290 for Joe Biden, and that at the time was quite a cautious prediction. Since that time, I think having seen some of the changes over the weekend, I think I can still fairly say quite confidently that Joe Biden will win by at least 290, and we may even see him entering the 320 territory. But the big problem here is that if we see something close to the polling mistakes that we saw 4 years ago, which in effect equates to a 3-point move either way, this race moves from a landslide to very tight very quickly. So, if you look at where Joe Biden's currently ahead and you take his lead as a sign he's going to win those states, it looks very good. But then again, for a long time, it looked good for Hillary Clinton.
And just to be clear to our viewers, the threshold we're looking at is 270 votes in the electoral college. You're thinking 290 plus for Biden, which I think most people would say, it's comfortable. It's a clear margin. You're thinking now slightly above that level. So maybe take us through, if you could, some of the key battleground states that we were looking at. We were looking
Sure.
at obviously Florida is one of the early declarations, but everyone's particularly looking at Philadelphia. And I think you flagged up before the other key states: Michigan, Wisconsin,
Sure.
maybe Arizona, even Georgia. So maybe walk us through one by one, if you could, when we're likely to hear the result, and in your view, in terms of your prediction, which way they're going to go. And I think if we start off with Florida, because that's the one that's likely to declare before we go live again tomorrow morning at 7 in the morning.
Sure. Well, I think the easiest would be if I'm able to share my screen so that I can show you more clearly. I don't know if I'm able to share this. I guess not. Okay. Well, essentially, I'll just speak to it then. The 2016 map. If you take that as a starting point, which Donald Trump won with 306 electoral votes to 232, which Hillary Clinton lost. If you take that as a starting point, and you assume, which the polls have assumed, that Joe Biden will not be losing any of the states that Hillary Clinton won, then this race is essentially being fought on a handful of states that Donald Trump carried, that he's now looking to be in trouble in. And Florida is one of those states. Florida is going to be one of the states that declared their results the earliest. The polls close 7 p.m. local time, which is 1 a.m. for us here in Brussels. And the reason why Florida will declare quite soon after that time is that they've already begun counting. They've received a lot of mail-in ballots. It's a state that is used to having a lot of absentee ballots anyway. And so they have a lot of processes in place to ensure a quick count. Now, what we're likely to see, or even not see, this evening around 1:30 a.m. Is we're going to be getting some results from Florida. Just because Florida is receiving a lot of mail-in ballots does not mean that there won't be a significant number of in-person voters, which we're likely to see in the north part of Florida for sure. So you won't get Florida getting called one way or the other. All we might be seeing is some indication of how the race is going based on some select counties that will be certainly declaring their results quite early. I think you're on mute, Mark.
Just to be clear, though, Ryan, you personally are calling Florida for Biden.
No. So I was all to say that we won't be getting a definitive result. Now, ahead of the weekend, the Joe Biden campaign was quite worried about Florida, and they seemed to be moving in the wrong direction in some of the more recent polls with a tightening of the race. And so I think over the weekend they've begun to feel more confident. They may have stopped the bleeding, but there is a risk that they may have lost a lot of ground there as Trump's been gaining up on them in the polls. And a big voting group to keep in mind are the Cuban voting group in Florida, which is quite more conservative than other Latino American voting groups across the country. And they seem to be staying even more with Trump than they were 4 years ago. And two complicating factors here that will help determine Florida are the fact that Joe Biden is much more competitive on the white vote than Hillary Clinton ever was, and he's actually also competing on the senior vote. Now, the polls may have missed something on those two categories, but if Joe Biden's competitive on those two fronts, then we're likely to see a very tight race. But if I had to venture a prediction, I still don't see the Democrats turning Florida blue again.
Okay, and if you want to now maybe walk us through the other results. I mean, again, you mentioned Pennsylvania, of course, over the last few weeks has been looking good for Biden, but by an incredibly marginal amount, particularly given the potential for fault in the polling, the margin of error 3 or 4% maybe even, and he's on a lead there of about 5. So looking okay, Ryan, for Philadelphia and Pennsylvania.
For Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is not going to be declaring results tonight. Not to spoil the evening for anyone, but they're not allowed to start counting their early ballots until Election Day, and to my knowledge, they're also not allowed to count those until they've already counted the in-person ballots as well. So I think some reports have said that Pennsylvania may declare on Friday their results, and so if it's come down to Pennsylvania, we're going to be in this for a few more days. But I don't see Pennsylvania necessarily being the deciding state for this election. And if it comes down to Pennsylvania deciding it, I think the Trump campaign may feel quietly confident about their chances in winning there.
Okay, and then looking at some of the other key battleground states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, maybe in some of the others. But let's just assume that Trump does do well in Florida and maybe even Pennsylvania. Is there still a pathway to victory for Biden?
Yes. So effectively, if we start from the premise that Joe Biden is going to hold the states that Hillary Clinton won, then you have to start looking at, okay, what are the states that Joe Biden's going to be able to flip that Donald Trump won 4 years ago? And so the two battleground states where Donald Trump is the most in trouble are Wisconsin and Michigan, which have been very consistent in putting Joe Biden's lead above any margin of error. So if you put those into his camp, then you're left with Arizona, Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, Florida, Ohio, and Pennsylvania as the remaining states. And what that creates is a situation of, throughout the evening, as states start declaring, Donald Trump has to go through several make or break situations, because if any one of those states goes to Joe Biden, having already maintained the states that Hillary won, plus Wisconsin and Michigan, if any single one of those states between Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Arizona, or Pennsylvania go towards Biden, it's game over. So you see paint a picture of a very narrow path to victory for Donald Trump if he is unable to maintain Wisconsin and Michigan, which most of the polling would indicate he is the most likely to lose.
So the picture you're painting really is that although Biden could pull off, Trump could pull off some real surprises, maybe early on, like Florida, maybe it could look very good for him in Pennsylvania. The chances of him holding all the ground that he needs to hold, that he held against Hillary Clinton, is extremely unlikely, because, as you say, Wisconsin and Michigan are inevitably, looks like, going to fall to Biden. And then Biden only needs to pick one or two other states off, really, to get that 290 that you're talking about. So the path to victory for Biden's pretty, there are so many paths to victory almost. It's hard to see him, which is your conclusion, it's hard to see him not winning tonight.
Exactly. And of those states that are remaining, you have Joe Biden ahead, the highest in Arizona, which of the ones I've mentioned will be the one of the last to declare. So if it comes down to needing Arizona, I think the Biden campaign will be quite confident there. And even in Texas and Georgia and North Carolina, you're talking about toss-up states that could go either way. Not to mention Pennsylvania and Florida, which also could go either way. So for the Trump campaign, it would be very uncomfortable getting to this point where of 5-6 races remaining, if Joe Biden won one of them, it's over. So that is all to say that Trump could win Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Texas, and still lose the race if he loses Arizona. So, that paints a very tough picture for the president.
And just to perhaps go a bit deeper into the polling and polling error, obviously that was one of the main causes of the shock last time. People argued the polls just simply weren't reflecting the Trump supporters. The demographics were wrong. There were perhaps some so-called shy Trump voters that weren't properly being taken into account. Now, of course, all the polls claim that they've adjusted their methodology significantly since then. And I think that's been evaluated and checked. And it's pretty well understood that the polling now is very accurate. But there are still now people who say, but there are still shy Trump voters, or you're underestimating the enthusiasm of the Trump voters. That's not been adequately measured. But you've got, you both can't be right, Ryan. The pollsters have almost overcompensated for Trump's shy voters, or they haven't. What is it? Are the polls wrong, or are they just wrong in the traditional sense, in that it's polling error? It's just a margin of error that could be wrong, and then it could go either way. It could be a massive Biden victory, or it could be a narrow Trump victory. So what's wrong with the polling?
Well, what is wrong with the polling? Well, some of the accusations, there's been 2 accusations really. You've just outlined 2 of them. One of them is that, of course, the polls are still missing a shy Trump vote, and that they're going to suffer the same fate as they did 4 years ago, which would really be quite damning for the industry as a whole. The second is that they've perhaps even overcompensated for an existing shy Trump vote that may no longer exist in the same way. It's the president has spent a lot of his campaign trying to mobilize people who would have otherwise been shy Trump voters, but would now appear as very vocal supporters of the president. It's hard to imagine a situation where the pollsters and the polling companies are missing these voters, or that there's a massive, because 4 years ago there was a massive group of shy Trump voters that were just completely missed. And so any adjustment to the polling algorithms or how they've been conducting them would account for some of that. So it's hard to imagine them missing things the same way as they had 4 years ago. So for me, if you're asking me my opinion on the polls, I think they're perhaps overcompensating for a supposed shy Trump vote. And that's creating a situation where you have a 8 to 10 point race nationally that appears a lot closer when you look at the state level.
Yeah.
Because of this overcompensation for a shy Trump vote.
Yeah. And obviously, we're going to find out pretty soon whether that's the case or not. But if you read certainly some of the analysts like Nate Silver at 538, they've been through all this data, and they just think there's no evidence that there's that the pollsters are missing out on the shy Trump voters, or the so-called shy Trump voters. But polling, it always is open to the margin of error. But looking at the margin of error, the view is, even if there's a catastrophic 2016 margin of error mistake again, Biden still wins.
Yes, that's looking at some of the polls. As I said before, the polling error from 4 years ago, it can amount to up to 3 points, which would still, even if that happened in many states, you would still have Biden leading in the polls. Although in some of the states, it might throw his lead into the margin of error, with him still technically leading. So it's even with a 2016 error, it would take quite a big mistake from pollsters, even bigger, I would say, than 4 years ago, for them to have missed something that big about Trump supporters.
Yeah. And turning, if we make some of the legal issues, obviously there's been a big row about the mail-in ballots, and various states have different procedures. Some of those procedures have been challenged. Some states and indeed counties have made it easy for voters. Some have allegedly made it quite difficult. And I think there's been a Supreme Court ruling fairly recently about mail-in ballots in some of the key battleground states. So there is a risk that although 7 o'clock in the morning, Ryan, you're confident that we'll have a pretty clear picture of the direction of travel, the legal dispute may undermine the ability of us to really call the election in not just in the days ahead, but potentially the weeks ahead. Could there be a protracted legal battle?
Yes, is the short answer to that question. And if people are looking for any precedent, you have to just look at the 2000 election for a protracted legal battle over what happened in Florida. Now, the Trump campaign is bound to challenge some element of this election tonight. If for no other reason than they think that with mail-in ballots comes more voter fraud, and that's something that they've been highlighting for a few months now, especially since mail-in voting has turned out to be a major used in a very big way due to the COVID pandemic, and so what I outlined earlier about what we're expecting to hear tonight, that is consistent only if the states maintain those hours, right? It's not unusual for states to request an extension to their voting hours, like North Carolina did just within the last hour. So that also complicates things and means that some states, if they're asking for an extension like that, they may not even get their results tonight, not to mention any legal battle that the Trump campaign will be ready to launch. And both campaigns have lawyers on hand across the country, waiting to pounce on the Democrat side, waiting to pounce on any apparent suppression of mail-in votes or of voters. And the Trump campaign is ready to launch legal battles to challenge some of the mail-in ballots that have been received in quite some big numbers in the key states that we've been outlining.
And this could go on for some time, but of course we have got time. The presidential transfer of power, of course, doesn't occur till January. I mean, no one, I'm sure, would want this dispute to go on until then. But constitutionally, there are provisions in place, presumably, to take into account a protracted legal battle. And I guess the courts would also want to resolve this as quickly as possible, particularly given the unrest that it is feared may well be generated.
Absolutely. I mean, it's the Supreme Court now has a 6-3 majority on the conservative side, thanks to Trump having now nominated 3 justices to that court: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett just last week. So the concern is that if a case around the election would be heard at the Supreme Court, there's a concern about what they might do. Now, in recent weeks, and as you mentioned quite recently, the Supreme Court has actually tried to be as uninvolved as possible in determining some cases around mail-in ballots and the like. So it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of it will depend, of course, on what kind of lead in the ballot in the polls is Trump challenging, right? If he's behind by quite a lot of votes, he may challenge all he wants. But if he's behind by a couple, and it's not a very big lead for Joe Biden, I can see the Trump campaign trying to challenge this all the way up to the Supreme Court for sure. Whether it gets that far, who knows? But there are remedies in the Constitution. Ultimately, it looks as though if there's no transition of power by the inauguration day, that Nancy Pelosi would take over, which some Democrats may not mind.
Yep, and I'm sure Donald Trump would certainly find that a pretty unbelievable scenario to come into. One thing losing to Biden, but maybe another thing losing to Nancy Pelosi from his point of view. Yeah. So if we could perhaps turn to a subject that we've done a deep dive on in previous episodes of the US presidential election show, and that is what this all means for Europe and indeed the world right now. You mentioned before things like the Paris Accord, the climate deal that the US pulled out of. You've mentioned before the impact on foreign affairs, Russia, China. You mentioned before the impact on global free trade and the rules-based system, and the WTO in particular. Obviously, we've discussed COVID-19. Could you foresee major changes in foreign policy, particularly as to how they affect the EU, if Biden wins, or indeed Trump is re-elected for a second term? Should Europe be bracing itself for major change, whoever wins this election?
That's a question that many of the European capitals will be pondering tomorrow morning when results become clearer, which I'm looking forward to hearing some of the reaction that we'll be having on the show tomorrow morning. There was a very interesting article in The Economist this week that was highlighting one country in particular, the EU, France, who may have, the overall conclusion is that a Joe Biden win is what the EU wants. But people tend to forget that it's been under a Trump presidency that the EU has discovered its need for more autonomy in foreign policy, more autonomy in the multilateral institutions, and that it could no longer rely on the US. Now, many in Europe have been pushing that narrative for quite some time, but it was tough to push when the US had Barack Obama as president because there was no traction for the argument. And under Trump, we've seen the EU led in big part by France, but other countries as well, pushing for a much more autonomous EU. Now, if Joe Biden wins tonight, come January, you're going to see a big change in the U.S. foreign policy. The U.S. will, under Joe Biden, immediately be back on the world stage. Now, what does that mean? And that means that it will be much more engaged than it has been in NATO and the WTO, the UN. You're talking about finally the U.S. Recommitting itself to the multilateral world order, which is not necessarily something that the EU may want to see, because if Joe Biden enters the White House, what kind of EU is he expecting to find? Is he expecting to find the same EU that he left 4 years ago? Or is he thinking that the EU has changed, which any advisor in his team would tell him that the EU has changed a lot in 4 years. So there's a few foreign policy challenges that the EU would need to face up to, even if Joe Biden wins. Now, it would be a much more predictable U.S., but there's been a lot of tension in that relationship long before Trump ever showed up, and I think those old tensions may reemerge, and some of the, for lack of a better word, some of the craziness from the last 4 years may be a bit dampened.
Yeah. So, in other words, Europe could well have to face up to change at a foreign policy level, whoever is the incumbent of the White House for the next 4 years. And turning to some immediate issues like Paris, we've got the COP coming up next year in the UK. Of course, we've got Brexit. The transition period ends at the end of this year. There's some pretty dramatic things going on, not least, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. All these issues are in the in-trays of the European capitals. On the whole, though, you would have thought, notwithstanding what you've just said, that they still would prefer to perhaps be dealing with a more coherent, as they would see it, Biden Democrat-led administration in order to try and address these immediate concerns that they have, Brexit, the pandemic in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think, being predictable as we've seen in the last 4 years is very underrated, right? Being normal, sending a tweet that won't suddenly change your country's foreign policy stances is underrated, right? So a lot of good things will happen from the EU's perspective if Joe Biden wins. Does not mean that things will suddenly go to the US and the EU being the best of friends, right? They may find, as you mentioned, the forthcoming COP in the UK, they may find room to cooperate with the EU on on climate matters, and yet the EU is pushing for a digital tax on some of the big U.S. companies, and now that's not going to go away no matter who wins tonight. So there's a lot of policy debate that has been swept under the carpet under the headline that the EU wants a Joe Biden presidency, and therefore it's going to be a fantastic honeymoon period of some sort of coming back together of old pals. But that's not the case. The U.S. has changed and has become. The Democratic Party has become much closer to what the EU wants on the climate side, but it does not mean that they're going to find cooperation across the board. So there's a lot of tension points that will certainly reemerge. And one last point I would make on the foreign policy side is that, 4 years the EU's been trying to figure itself out in terms of as a foreign policy actor. It moves far too slow, right? Things move far too slow in the council, right? With the requirement for unanimity, right? They can never agree on positions fast enough. They can never agree on action fast enough. So how long will the US wait for the EU to be at its level as a foreign policy actor? That is a big question as well. Will there be some frustrations that will boil over as the US looks to move fast, but the EU cannot? So there's a lot of things that we should be watching in if Joe Biden was to win.
Well, thank you for that, Ryan. Going to an issue I know that is a subject very close to your heart, and that is tackling climate change, the Paris Climate Accords, and above all, you're one of the experts in Brussels on the European Green Deal. How will that change from a public policy perspective? How will Timmermans, for example, view a Biden victory? Will it empower him, or will he, as you say, just almost feel, well, we're going ahead anyway, whatever, despite the Americans? Indeed, you could argue that he's been given more, he's been empowered by Trump's neglect, as it's viewed over here in Europe, of the climate issue. So does it actually make any difference to Timmermans and his Green Deal, whoever wins?
No, I think he's been quite empowered to lead the charge as the head of the European Green Deal for the EU, and he's also the face of the EU at climate negotiations. And as much as it would certainly help his case if the US was an ally and not an enemy on this front, I don't think having the US on board changes in too many ways his day-to-day. The big challenge, of course, isn't the US, no matter what the perception is with regard to Trump's, his own personal beliefs on climate change. The big target remains: can the EU convince polluters in Asia, for example, like China, India, and even Japan, to buy into their climate change ideas? The US may publicly look like it's against what the EU is pushing for, but of course, you look at a state level, and many of the states have maintained some pretty good environmental track records. Of course, some states would have been emboldened by Trump's climate change skeptical stances to ignore some of the things they should be doing. And people should make no mistake about it that a Trump re-election, we will see more rollbacks of environmental regulations than we saw in the first term. And so from that perspective, that Trump is opposed to the European Green Deal, and if you're able to remove that kind of opponent, no matter what stance Joe Biden takes from the EU's perspective would be much better. Doesn't change, I don't think, their mission, but it might make things a bit easier if Biden wins.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I think that's an important point to understand, that it's not probably going to have much impact on things like the European Green Deal on a day-to-day basis, but that, as you say, that's ushering in, if Biden wins, a new era of predictability would generate a sigh of relief in Brussels and no doubt European capitals, so they can focus more perhaps on what they were doing anyway, but without those distractions, without the uncertainties that have been generated. If we could perhaps in the final chapter, Ryan, just perhaps preview the show tomorrow in the morning and look at like what we're likely to hear from. So I think we're going to be hearing first off in the morning from Berlin, with our experts there in Berlin giving us an on-the-ground assessment of the likely German reaction, in particular the view of the German government and German business. Of course, Germany holding the EU presidency at the current time. Angela Merkel, I think, has made it pretty clear that she's not exactly completely aligned with Donald Trump in relation to global affairs. Will there be a huge sigh of relief in Germany in particular, that it's at least back to, albeit with all those challenges with Biden, back to perhaps a more civilized discourse if there's a Democrat administration? So is it to Berlin that we should particularly focus? But also, as you know, we're also going to hear from Paris and Lisbon, the Portuguese, of course, also very key players here. The French you've already referred to. Of all the member state capitals, is it Germany that has the most at stake?
If yes, in a normal situation, it would be Germany, as the historic guardians of the transatlantic relationship, and the U.S. and Germany for many years now have enjoyed close partnership. The issue I see for Germany is that with Angela Merkel leaving and them having an election next year, they're going to be potentially far too caught up in domestic affairs and trying to determine Germany's own future to have any time to rebuild a Germany-U.S. partnership. And certainly because of Brexit, the U.S. will be on the lookout for a new inroad into the EU, a new special partner, if you will. And so that opens up the door to someone like France. So the reaction from Paris will be quite interesting. As we know, Macron has been labeled as the Trump whisperer. He really put on quite a show to try and get Donald Trump on his side. And, he's had some close successes on the policy front in that regard, but more failures. His reaction will be quite interesting. To see if because Germany may be too caught up in domestic issues, maybe France will be stepping forward as the new main U.S. partner in the EU. We'll see. I mean, France is also the one pushing this digital tax the most. So France will have to make a calculation. Does it need the U.S. as a major ally, as a best friend, or is it keen to push this European autonomy? Which will include a digital tax, which may include a carbon border tax, which may target the U.S. These are some tough questions that we will need to hear from, maybe not tomorrow morning, but down the line. So the immediate reaction for me, the most interesting one will be from Paris, but I think we may certainly need to hear what Berlin's reaction is, as Angela Merkel will still be in office for at least a year.
Yeah. Well, I think, as I said, we're going to be hearing from our Brussels group experts from Berlin. I think about 10 minutes past 7 tomorrow morning. I think about 7:30 we'll be hearing from our Brussels group colleagues in Paris. So, as you say, Ryan, they will no doubt kickstart this discussion about how relationships may change and alter if there is a Biden White House. You mentioned Brexit, and obviously we'll be hearing from our colleagues in London as well. They're going to react, colleagues at Luther Van Dragen, they're going to react to the news as far as we know it at 7 or around about, I think about 20 past 7 in the morning. What do you think the impact of a Biden White House will be on Brexit? Now, the headline has always been he won't be very keen on a trade deal with the UK. He's always with the EU side in the Brexit debate and discussion. But on the other hand, Ryan, the UK and the US have been strong partners historically, culturally, historically, obviously with their links, but militarily, but above all, in terms of trade. It's a huge amount of trade from the EU. What was the EU 28 now, EU 27, but the UK US trade is enormous. At the end of the day, isn't it is in his interests to strike a good trade deal with the UK?
I mean, there are a lot of reasons why a UK-US trade deal would be beneficial to the US. Certainly, opening up the UK market for some of its products that the EU market wasn't open for could be interesting. The problem is that you have an awkward triangle here. You have the UK, the US, and the EU. And in an ideal world, they would all have trade deals with each other. But the issue is that it's very much a give and take situation, right? Now, a trade deal with the US for the UK would force it potentially away from some of the standards that are needed for the European market. And so getting closer to the US comes at the expense of its proximity to the EU. Likewise, same thing for the US. Would a UK trade deal sacrifice any hopes it has of securing an EU-US trade deal? The EU-US trade deal, you ask any trade expert, they'll tell you it's been stuck in the mud for years. There's no point in reviving it. But is there scope for smaller bilateral deals? That remains to be seen. So I don't know if Boris Johnson and Joe Biden would necessarily be vibing in the same way as Donald Trump and Boris Johnson have been, and it's just a question of personality as well. But certainly under Barack Obama, the UK understood that it would struggle to get to the front of the line for a trade deal, and I don't know, and I don't see Joe Biden deviating from that stance. Certainly because we have to remember that they have been very vocal on Brexit, but the Democratic Party has an interest in what happens with regards to the Irish border, and they haven't been very impressed with things like the internal market bill, for instance. They haven't been very impressed with much of the Brexit debate, and so bolstered by that, I don't see Joe Biden jumping at the chance of a UK trade deal.
Again, I think you're making an important point there, Ryan, about the close affiliation between the Democrat Party traditionally and, of course, Irish interests in both Northern Ireland, but above all in the Republic of Ireland, have always shaped and influenced Democrat thinking. And whilst it's easy to look at, yes, the trade volumes, I guess the politics here matters a great deal. So really what you're saying is there's no easy answers on Brexit for the UK. If Biden wins, maybe there's no easy answers, of course, if Trump is re-elected, given the unpredictability. I think what you're painting is a very complex picture emerging almost whatever happens tonight in the early hours of the morning. Not only could the counting and the legal dispute run on for weeks, but the politics may take not just weeks, but maybe months or indeed years to reshape or realign relations across the Atlantic between the EU and the US. But in the few final moments remaining, Ryan, are there any short-term significant differences that would instantly materialize? Maybe I'm being over-optimistic here, but sometimes in politics, things can make a difference quickly to the benefit of society. Any quick wins would occur for Europe if Biden wins by a decisive margin by the morning.
Yes, absolutely. For the EU, just to be blunt about it, for the EU, a quick win is no Donald Trump. That's as simple as that. I mean, Donald Trump has been the North Star, if you will, for a lot of the populist campaigns in the EU. A lot of people have been aspiring to his level of politics and his level of rhetoric. And so removing that from the equation would be a big sigh of relief for the EU on a domestic front, never mind a foreign policy front. And then again, an instant win would be the fact that you may gain a climate change ally, although you most certainly will lose a climate change opponent. And there's a very long list of benefits that just come about like that. If there's a change of president, recommitment to NATO, recommitment to the WHO, recommitment to the multilateral world order that the U.S. is supposed to be underwriting, although it has not been doing so for quite some time. And so the EU has really struggled to step up into a role that you might otherwise associate with the US. It's tough to take on the mantle of leadership when you can't necessarily back it up with speed of action, nor with any decisive action. And so having the US back on side could help the EU bolster some of its positions.
And I guess that would include Ryan, Iran. That could include Ryan, Iran, North Korea, China, but I guess in particular Russia. The impact of a Biden victory would very quickly change the dynamics vis-a-vis Russia if there was closer alignment between the EU 27, the UK, and the White House.
Yes, absolutely. It's no secret that Trump has enjoyed close relationship with Russia, and that he's tried to foster something similar with North Korea. Albeit neither one of those relationships has had any benefit, but certainly he's tried to, impose his own style on those foreign policy issues. And bearing in mind, Russia may also be a domestic policy issue or even a domestic security issue. And so the EU will find an ally in Russia sanctions, maybe even find an ally in any anti-China stance that it would like to enact. In the U.S., in the Democratic Party, and certainly Joe Biden, there's a strong anti-Russia stance in terms of the Russian leadership. And there's also a very strong desire to push back against China as well. And so I think the big question for the EU that they will have to answer tomorrow or in the months ahead is if the US changes its policy track from the last 4 years with regards to these countries, is the EU prepared to act quickly to join the US in that endeavor? And if the answer is yes, and if they're able to, great. If they can't, the US is just going to go ahead by itself anyway and leave the EU behind, which has been the story of the US-EU relationship since the EU was created. The EU would argue that it's trying to change things and be a quicker actor, but I think the US will be expecting results under the Biden presidency.
Okay, well, it's fascinating to talk to you, Ryan, as always, about the long-term policy challenges of a win by Biden, but also obviously more predictability under Trump if he secures that second term. But just to perhaps repeat what you said right at the beginning, you are nonetheless, despite all the uncertainty regarding the polling, still predicting a pretty decisive Biden majority in the Electoral College, 290 plus. And even taking into account polling error, you think Biden has so many pathways to victory, it's pretty inconceivable that Trump could win. Accepting though your point that there's always a chance. There's always, I think it's to 10% margin of error that could mean he could prevail by. And you think by 7 o'clock tomorrow morning we'll be in a much better position to know, Ryan. Let's hope so.
Yeah, well, I think when I gave my 290 prediction, since I've given that prediction, I actually sat down with a blank electoral map just to go state by state. Who do I think is going to win? And I shared this with you yesterday. I think I came out with Joe Biden winning with 322 electoral votes. And for some headlines, I had Joe Biden winning Georgia and North Carolina, but losing Florida, and Joe Biden winning Pennsylvania and Arizona, Wisconsin and Michigan. That is not a good result for Trump. And so, yeah, I think by to answer your other question, by 7 a.m., I don't think we're going to know a definitive result of the race. What I think is we're going to have a clearer picture of certainly which candidate has to do what with the remaining states that are counting in order to win. And also by then we may have had a candidate or even both candidates declare victory at that stage, which could be quite crazy. And also we'll have some reaction from the EU states by then, which will be worth, as I've been outlining, will be worth following very closely as an indicator for how the future US-EU relationship will proceed.
Well, you've got a long night ahead of you, Ryan, and we look forward to enjoying your company again at in what is, I don't know, several hours' time now. I know you're going to be staying up through the night. You voted yourself in the election a few days ago, so you've got a stake yourself in all of this. So good luck, Ryan, tonight. Very much look forward to hearing your assessment in the morning, together with our colleagues from across Europe's capitals. And on that note, we're going to go out showing the trailer to this program and tomorrow's program, just to wish all our viewers a good evening, a good night, and a good morning, and see you at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning CET for hopefully what will be the definitive US presidential election show by LP Brussels, when we'll be very confident, we think, that Biden will at that point be ahead of Trump, albeit with all the variables and exceptions that Ryan has just outlined. But just to repeat that forecast prediction again from Ryan: Biden to win by 322 electoral college votes. We won't know for sure by 7 o'clock in the morning, but we will be well on our way to knowing. So good night to everyone. See you 7 o'clock tomorrow morning. Hello from Brussels. I'm Mark Watson.
Good night, everyone.
At 7 p.m. CET tonight for our live broadcast of the US presidential election show. We'll be joined by experts from across Europe and the US, and we'll be giving you our final forecast. We'll go through the night, so join us again at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning with the latest state of play. We'll go through the night, so you don't have to. We'll be looking at what it all means for the US, for Europe, and for the world too. In the meantime, take care.